I will tell you that the longest day challenge is a challenge, and it's one of the most significant challenges I've done in a very long time. When we last left Dick and Shakedown on their longest day challenge, they were racing to catch the last ferry to Dunoon, some 220 miles away. 5 hours later. Is that pedestrian entrance? What does that say? Foot passenger only service. We gotta turn around. Oh fuck! Stay up, stay up, stay up, stay up, stay up. Excuse me, sorry to bother you. Do you know how we get to the ferry terminal for vehicles?
Yes. Just keep going straight.
Just keep going straight.
Just keep following the road and then you'll see the Western Ferries.
Okay.
It's called the Western Ferries. It's
Western Ferries.
Not even 5 minutes.
That way. Keep going straight. You're a doll. Thanks so much. Have a good day. To Dunoon, this is the one.
How you doing?
All right.
All right, chaps. And a divvy.
How are you, gentlemen?
Good. Not too bad at all. How you doing?
All right.
You've got about 15-20 minutes before the ferry's due. There's tea, coffee and food.
That's amazing. Thank you. Can anyone give us advice on how the ferry works?
They'll be here in about 15 minutes, 20 minutes.
Okay.
Because they're running every half hour at the moment.
All right.
You just pay when you're on the ferry.
Just pay them. Do they take cards or cash only? Or?
Yeah, they'll take cards on the ferry, so there's no problem.
All right. Awesome. How's the MP3 holding up?
Well, it's 400cc, 34 horsepower, 12-litre tank. What more could you
What
ask?
more could
And
you ask for?
Italian.
Awesome. Reliability is all I think about when I hear Italian.
Yeah, you've got that right. If I switch my lights on when I start the engine, I've got the side lights, but I've lost headlights before, I've lost...
Well,
you name it.
Steve, we're all out here together, so good luck
one of
and have a good one. Looks awesome.
I've got an engine warning light. The power cuts out, so I just have to wait, let it cool down and restart it.
Normal.
All right.
Don't think it's used to having its throttle pins wide open.
Yeah. Mine got a little angry. But the last one?
Don't forget to take away your souvenir tin of beverage, which you will require for the end of the trip.
Iron brew.
Haha!
If you reject it, we cancel your Scottish visa.
Well, we drink our fair share of iron brew.
That tips it over.
These guys treating bikes. Do you need your chain lube? No.
Oh, they're doing it for me. Thank you for that.
Do you want on the center stand?
If you want. Yeah.
It's easier.
Take the full tank if you want.
Can you get mine?
Yeah, I'll get it next.
No, just using a shaft drive.
I know.
All right.
We made the ferry. And we caught up with some riders. We've been riding for 17 hours straight. We've stopped to pee, to fill up with gas, and to put a little bit of food and water in our mouths, and we've kept riding. We've been going, and this is what we've been running for. The last ferry runs at 10:30 tonight because it's a Tuesday. Tomorrow, if we were running the longest day challenge, it would be midnight, so we'd have lots and lots of time to get here. But we were racing from Land's End at 4 in the morning until here without a breath, without a break, without a significant stop. But there is the Scottish Highlands, or the foothills of the Scottish Highlands. We're crossing to Dunoon, and we then have probably about 6 hours more. What do you say, 6 hours more? 6 to 7 hours more to John of Groats. You can see Shakedown is using this time to change batteries, change comms, eat a little food, put some more layers on because the sun's going down, and that's what I have to do now too. Everything that has been planned has been out the window, and it's just flying by the seat of our pants. So it's a significant endeavor. And I should say that Shakedown and I have been at the end of the group. Our bikes have been running great, except my bike didn't want to start at the last gas station, and my lovely Highlands headlamps have snapped off, and we bodged together with a bit of tape. The diversion is running flawlessly, knock on wood, and the highway pegs that we added have been a lifesaver. So there's lots to say, there's lots to catch up on. I'm rambling a bit, but I'll just say that we've been going for 17 hours straight, and we haven't had a bit of caffeine and very, very little sugar. So you can see how I'm buzzing after 17 hours. And once it goes down, and once the sun goes down and it gets dark, and we get to Inverness, we're going to be pounding the caffeine. So you can imagine how buzzy we're going to be when we reach John of Groats.
As soon as you get off the ferry, it's awesome riding.
On the ferry, I replaced our cameras for brand new GoPro Hero 10s. I had invested a lot of money in the new camera specifically for the longest day challenge. They promised improved nighttime resolution as well as advanced image stabilization. Despite updating the firmware and using the more expensive recommended SD cards, both new cameras threw SD card errors and heartbreakingly corrupted all of our subsequent footage for the rest of the ride and the rest of our trip. After weeks of research, hundreds of pounds on recovery and repair software, and dozens of hours of tedious cataloging, processing, and editing, I have managed to salvage some footage that illustrates the last 6.5 hours of our 24-hour ride. I hope you'll forgive me for the imperfect footage and continue to follow along on our adventure. 1/4 of our total time on the bikes would be spent wending our way through the dark roads of Scotland. Midges appeared on the shores of Dunoon, inside the helmet, in our eyes, and in our ears. Of course I made a wrong turn coming out of the ferry terminal. The riders we had met up with at checkpoint 4 had disappeared, and we didn't see them for the rest of the night. We raced the sun to the horizon along lazy, winding roads that all seemed to hug the coast of chain-link lochs. Summer's sweet peach sunsetting skies pulled us along the loping lanes. I'd never ridden this length of road, but it felt familiar and comfortable. With as many miles to go as we had left, the pesky midges and the impending nightfall, one would forgive us for being a little apprehensive about what was to come, but nothing near a hint of worry crossed our minds as we were enjoying ourselves too much to consider our situation. Until we turned right onto the A83 and found ourselves in a deep green valley. Charcoal gray clouds gathered low in the sky, some cascading over the tops and down the sides of the southern ridge. This should have worried me, but their arrival with dusk hid any threat they suggested, and rather acted to lend an air of mystery to the valley as we skirted the middle of the northern slopes, before climbing up and out on a twisting road across to the southeastern gap. A mile and a half is all that separates the northeastern tip of Loch Long from the shoulder of Loch Lomond at Tarbet, where we met the A82, but the geography and the settlements were worlds apart. We ultimately joined the A82 on the northern shores of Loch Lomond and followed a familiar road up to Fort William. The light hadn't completely failed us as yet, and we reminisced about our winter ride along this road back in November of 2019. We had said to each other at the time that riding this section of road in the summer would be amazing if the traffic wasn't too bad. To our surprise, the road was as wet and slick as it was back in the winter of 2019. Swaths of water cut across the road, pouring out of the hillside, making any heroic motorcycling a deadly pursuit. Curiously, this was both reassuring and troubling. As the earth finished its turn away from the sun, Shakedown and I spent the time reminiscing about our frigid tour and past incidences and occurrences at each bend in the road. It's a curious road, the A82. This section follows the West Highland train line for a while until the train skirts around to the east to avoid the Highland National Park at Glencoe. If you're quick, you might catch a glimpse of the high arch train viaduct between the thick trees. Further along, you'll pass the modernist Loch Sloy power station, which opened in 1950, built by local laborers and German prisoners of war. The road winds through Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park, revealing centuries of human intervention between its crags, lochs, and forests. It's a bit confusing when you finally enter the Highlands. The landscape around you is flat lowland with kettle ponds and craggy rock formations. The only indication that you are in the fabled Scottish Highlands is a modest road sign, easily missed as you sail by. Imposing mountains dot the horizon but feel a million miles away from the wide, endless flatlands in which you find yourself. Riding a motorcycle in the dark is a unique experience. The world closes in around you, and if you're fortunate enough to be riding alone or at the back without any traffic behind you, you have the sense of flying through space. The edge of existence ends at your taillight. I was happy to have taken the trouble to upgrade the headlamps and to have added fog lights to the bikes. I've ridden bikes in the past with dim incandescent bulbs that could hardly keep up with me as I sped headlong into dark curves. The road into the Highlands is the road we all dream of when we imagine riding a motorcycle. Shakedown has dubbed it the Valley of the Gods. The first time we rode through, the mountains were frozen. Lazy deer lingered around the parking lot of the hotel at the mouth of the valley to grub food from bus-riding tourists. By the time we reached the Highlands on the longest day, it was dark. Our memories illuminated the mountains in place of the sun. The mountains loomed as stalwart, shadowed sentinels, guarding our way north. The deer that were sparse and lazy in the winter were now spry and bold, with one enormous doe nearly hitting Shakedown as it ran across the road, inches from his front wheel. Growing up in the northeast of the United States, we're no strangers to watching for deer on dark roads, but it always gets the blood pumping when you have a close call. If they weren't before, we then rode with our heads on swivels for the rest of the journey. The road through the Valley of the Gods is one of the most dramatic roads I've had the pleasure of riding. The scale of the valley can't be described faithfully, and as we were riding through it in the middle of the night, and my video footage is corrupted, this is not the moment to try. But what appears to be our misfortune in missing the grandeur of the mountains in the night was in fact to our benefit, as we weren't distracted from the masterpiece that is the road that traverses the length of the valley. The road designers must have been motorcyclists. Sure, geography and geology force road builders to make certain choices, but many of the turns and curves appeared to me to be insistent and hard-fought. Whether it was by design or circumstance, I am thankful for those who forged this road. As darkness shrouded the bikes, the midges propagated. Shakedown led most of the way to Fort William and spent the time panicking about the cloud of midges smashing against his helmet visor. I commiserated, likening the flurry of bugs in my headlight beam to that of driving through a snowstorm. When we finally arrived at an open petrol station in Fort William, Shakedown asked for my helmet so he could clean the massacred insects from our visors while I filled the bikes with fuel. He howled when he saw the state of my virtually spotless visor. "It's like a snowstorm," you said. "I thought you were experiencing the same as me." He scolded me. What? I said, looking over to him. He held up his helmet to reveal a virtually obscured visor riddled with thousands of beige bug carcasses. Just as the bikes were topped up, another rider came rolling in, his fairing riddled with midges and road rash from tip to stern along the brake side of his bike. He had crashed somewhere along the way, but managed to keep racing north. Shakedown force-fed me a mango-flavored Monster energy drink just as another group of riders rolled in. Leaving Fort William and longing for a warm bed to crawl into, we passed some errant youths hanging out by the other open petrol station, which I wish we had stopped at, as the experience at the first one was less than pleasant. But I won't bore you with the frustrating exchange with the midnight till jockey, insisting that he told me that the pump we were at wasn't working, and the details of how I needed to move both bikes after getting them positioned together by the pump, their fuel caps off, and the fuel nozzle in the first bike. There was always a shot of adrenaline when barreling into the night out of a bright town, with a full tank of gas, and a swarm of bikers chomping at your heels. Add to that the telltale buzz of the now legendary 125 floating in the foggy air, and you'll understand why our throttle hands were heavy on the gas. The 2 hours to Inverness was covered in the blink of an eye. Our stop at Checkpoint 5 was just long enough to eat a delicious homemade chocolate chip cookie and have a pee. While we rushed back out, the kind folks burning the midnight oil at the checkpoint sent us off with a scone and a small bottle of whiskey, to be enjoyed later. The next stop was John Groats. I felt selfish for most of the ride, preoccupied with what we needed to accomplish over the passing hours, angry at myself for getting us lost and losing time. Occasionally, I was able to remember why we were doing this fool thing. More often than not, after leaving checkpoints, to the thank yous from volunteers who gave their time to keep us going. I thought of my grandfather, who we lost to pancreatic cancer in 1987. I was 12 years old. The night before he died, we went to visit him in the hospital in New York. I had an assignment for school to write a biography about a family member who we admired. I mentioned it to my mother, who said that my grandfather had been incoherent and not himself for many days, and that it would be impossible for me to interview him for the assignment. She said he would be sleeping when we visited. To everyone's amazement, he was up and about. I mentioned my assignment to him selfishly, and he led me down to the common area, down the hall, and lit a cigarette, and then proceeded to tell me his life story. I couldn't write fast enough. We spent hours there, him smoking like a chimney. He was a charming Irishman, and successfully waved off the nurses long after visiting hours were over. I vividly remembered his description of their first flat in the Bronx. It was a small side room of what had been a much larger flat, but divided into one-room apartments for desperate immigrants. Between their room and their neighbor's room, there was a glass transom window, evidence of the previous life of the apartment. We didn't have much, he said, and we could barely afford this one room for the four of us, but I was damn sure we'd have some privacy. So he found a can of green, glossy enamel paint and proceeded to paint the transom shut. His son, my uncle, was a Vietnam veteran, a Navy CB, a proud, hard-working man his entire adult life. Nothing was beneath him to provide for his family. He worked menial jobs when politics and union affairs prevented him from working in his industry. Always a heavyset man, when we saw him for the last time, for Thanksgiving about 10 years ago, he looked very thin. We all congratulated him on his weight loss. He told us that the weight loss was because he was having trouble swallowing, but he hadn't been to the doctor. We all insisted that he'd go see his doctor, and a few weeks later he died from esophageal cancer as a result from his exposure to Agent Orange during his time in Vietnam. It later arose that many of his compatriots had also contracted the same condition. Last year, Fanny lost her aunt to cancer so quickly there wasn't even enough time to rally a defense. This past October, my own aunt passed away from lung cancer contracted after exposure to a faulty ventilator product. She never smoked. This spring, Fanny lost her aunt and her cousin, mother and son, to cancer within a few weeks of each other. When sharing these experiences with others, there isn't one person I've met who doesn't have a similar story of a loved one who was lost to or is currently battling cancer. In light of all of this, blasting north on a shitty motorcycle seemed such a silly thing. As we approached Wick, I made a comment about my surprise at the amount of light pollution such a small town could project against the clouds. Shakedown chuckled and told me that it wasn't light pollution, it was the light of pre-dawn. I had spent most of the ride thinking about myself and Shakedown, making time, finding fuel, navigating our way. When darkness fell, however, and the hours stretched from firm data into abstract concept. My thoughts transcended the act of riding a motorcycle. I found myself answering questions that I could not before we set off. Most folks I spoke to about the longest day challenge could understand the challenge of Land's End to John Groats. It's a time-honored journey for travelers in the UK. They could even understand the compression of the journey into one day. It seemed within reason for the more adventurous people I spoke with. But why ratty motorcycles? I'm sure it was born out of a notion of extending the challenge. A bit of good fun. The organizers and the first participants were young people 10 years ago when the first challenge was run. Perhaps foolhardiness and limited budgets forced this quintessential element, but swimming along through the darkness, empathically aware of the majestic desolation of the Scottish landscape swirling around me, I had an epiphany. Reflecting on all I had to do to get these bikes road ready, all of the people on whom I relied, all of the people to whom I've had to humble myself for help, assistance, and experience. Constrained by the limitations of the machines and the budget, this challenge was not just a bit of misguided fun to raise money for a good cause. Instead, it was a metaphor for fighting cancer itself. Trite as it may seem, this endeavor is a metaphor. No one plans to get cancer. You are saddled with it. For most, cancer is death, the great equalizer. No matter your status, your financial position, education, or fitness, cancer touches everyone. Riding on the summer solstice imbued the journey with historic, mythical meaning. We were brethren with the Anasazi, the Druids, the Egyptians, ancient forebears, blessing our task with the sun. These disregarded motorcycles we rode, most at the end of their usefulness, required diagnosis and treatment plans. They required expertise and charity. They required a community. They required time. No one who left Land's End at 4 a.m. woke up on the day and decided to make the run. It took months of planning, support, and hard work. But 20 hours in, sailing through the dark, we were on our own, still working and hoping to make it to the end. This ride was a beautiful thing. Unlike many cancer battles, most of us made it through to the other side, and those of us who did were battered, some broken, but all better off for the experience, appreciative and aware of the things, perhaps insignificant to us, before we set off. Unlike the greetings we received at each of the checkpoints, there was no fanfare or warm welcome at the end. Just a quiet car park and a stalwart sign, alerting us of our destination, and perhaps more poetically, how far we were from other destinations far away. Shakedown and I acknowledged the sign and each other before stumbling off to find a bed. When we were finally off of our bikes and out of our gear, we giggled like schoolgirls on a sleepover for longer than logic would have allowed before falling into dreamless sleeps. Where the fuck is my kickstand?
Just got there. Just as the first cars. Well, I think you'd already gone on.
If you like that video and you want to see more like them, hit like, share, and subscribe.